Sorry for running over.
That's okay.
Thank you for... Well, we're going to get those instruments out. The kids will be fine.
Aha! That's so exciting. Look at that. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Bible class. Glad that you are here. We are going to start our sojourn through the Book of Ruth, which is relatively short. That means we're going to have lots of time to chew on each little chunk. So two things that you'll need for today is the sheet that should be available on the lectern as you are coming in, all right? And you will need a Bible in some form, whether that's digital or on paper. There are Bibles in the back on the blue cart if you don't have one. So you will need one of those today. And we are going to look at the first 5 verses of chapter 1, but we'll also look at other things along the way. So you'll need your Bible to reach those and so forth. All right? So that is our plan for today, to take a look at the book of Ruth. Now, a couple of things that will help us zoom in. You know, right? The Old Testament is very big, and so it helps us to understand what's going on for the people of Israel when the book of Ruth comes along, when the events of the book of Ruth come along. All right? If you take a look up here on the screen, this is a very broad breakdown of when things happen in the Old Testament. So you have creation to the patriarchs, all right, so Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that whole bit. And so we're looking roughly from 4,000 to 2,000 BC. And then the time of the patriarchs is listed as there too. And so that's like about 1,000, maybe 1,100 years. And then, of course, the Israelites are enslaved in Egypt. So we've gone through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We've talked about, before this has already taken place, Joseph and his brothers. Joseph becomes excuse me just a second. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. So when we're talking patriarchs, we're talking Joseph and his brothers. Joseph becomes Pharaoh, and then he is ruling, and during that time another Pharaoh comes along, and that leads us into the Exodus, right? So at this point we're talking Moses and the people of Israel. So slavery in Egypt, that's about 400 years. And then they wander in the wilderness, and based on that, about how many years are we looking at when it comes to wandering in the wilderness? 40, yeah. So about 400 years slavery in Egypt, and then about 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. Then, of course, they get to the Promised Land. Moses passes, and Joshua is in charge. He leads the people into the Promised Land, and that is where we land here with that 400-year period where we have the book of Judges and all those different judges. So like Samson, Gideon, that sort of a thing. It's during that period, the campaigns and the judges. By campaigns, we mean military campaigns. Remember, God told the people to go in, remove the people, right? And so that's what's happening at this time when we get to the book of Ruth. All right? Now, something to help us get a sense of where. So that's when. There we go. That's a nice, big, clear image. Okay, so this is Palestine and Judah, the southern kingdom, during the time of Ruth, right? During the time of Ruth. So some things you want to point out there is Jerusalem, and you see Bethlehem. Down here, which is the part that I want to tie into, is Moab. All right, so when we hear Moab, we'll hear a lot about Moab in our study, and that's where that is located. So it's essentially on the eastern side of the sea and on the other side of the land of Judah there. All right, so that's when and where. So let's talk about what's going on. Let's dive right in. Would somebody read for us the paragraph at the top where it says a time of famine?
The Book of Ruth opens with the words, "In the days when the judges ruled." Although this statement links the Book of Ruth to the Book of Judges, determining precisely when the events described in Ruth occurred proves more difficult. For millennia, scholars have theorized about the length of time judges ruled over Israel. No one can claim to know the right answer except God himself. However, we can safely conclude that what is reported in Ruth occurred sometime between Israel's first and last judges, Othniel and Samuel, respectively. The fact that two generations are listed between Ruth and David could place Ruth's lifetime around Samson, the last judge mentioned in the Book of Judges.
Okay, so precisely when during the time of the campaign and the judges this takes place, we don't know, but it is between the judges, the first and the last, all right? So let's continue then. By the way, again, if you're just coming in, there are pages up on the lectern that you'll need for our study today if you want to get one of those. All right, so women at the time of Ruth, all right, women at the time of Ruth. Would someone read for us there, please?
The Book of Ruth occupies a unique place in the Bible. In this book, we catch a glimpse into ancient Hebrew culture from a woman's perspective. During Ruth's lifetime, women depended primarily on their fathers, husbands, or sons for provision. Only in rare circumstances could women inherit property. In verse 36, the death of a husband or father usually meant that a woman had to rely on others for care. Without such means of support, a woman was forced to look to charity for what little subsistence she might receive. These women needed a close blood relative called a redeemer or kinsman-redeemer to protect them. To provide for women in these circumstances, God required a male heir to redeem any next of kin brought to the brink of selling herself, her family, or her land when confronted with abject poverty. This provision plays out in Ruth.
Okay, so let's take a look at some passages there to give us some understanding about the situation for women at this time. So let's turn to the book of Numbers, and we want to go to chapter 36. Numbers chapter 36. And so we have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. All right, so let's take a look at Numbers chapter 36, all right, and I think let's start at verse 5, and I will read there. And Moses commanded the people of Israel according to the word of the Lord, saying, the tribe of the people of Joseph is right. This is what the Lord commands concerning the daughters of Zelophehad. Let them marry whom they think best. Only they shall marry within the clan of the tribe of their father. The inheritance of the people of Israel shall not be transferred from one tribe to another, for every one of the people of Israel shall hold on to the inheritance of the tribe of his fathers. And every daughter who possesses an inheritance in any tribe of the people of Israel shall be wife to one of the clan of the tribe of her father, so that every one of the people of Israel may possess the inheritance of his fathers. So no inheritance shall be transferred from one tribe to another, for each of the tribes of the people of Israel shall hold on to its own inheritance. The daughters of Zelophehad did as the Lord commanded Moses, and Mahlah, Tirzah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Noah, the daughters of Zelophehad, were married to sons of their father's brothers. They were married into the clans of the people of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, and their inheritance remained in the tribe of their father's clan. All right? So, communicating basically, thank you very much. Communicating basically that women would marry into the clan, and then that's in order that the inheritance would continue to flow down from there. All right. And let's go to Leviticus, the book before that, Leviticus 25. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus 25. Leviticus 25. All right. And when you reach Leviticus 25, go to verse 25. And would someone read verse 25?
If one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and sells some of their property, their nearest relative is to come and redeem what they have sold.
Okay, so that provision is made, all right? If your brother becomes poor to the point where he has to sell property, the nearest relative comes and buys it back. That's why we call it a redeemer, all right? That's why we call it a redeemer. So, for example, if I fell into poverty, and I had to sell my house, one of my two brothers would come and buy it back for me. They would redeem my house, all right? Okay, and would someone read 39 through 43? Okay, so the Lord is making things clear. Remember, in the year of Jubilee, that was the time when debts were released, right? When they were canceled, slaves were freed, so on and so forth. So that was a pretty big deal. All right? Oh, I knew somebody was going to ask that. 50 years, right? It's the 50th year. Yeah, so it didn't happen a lot. But it was a big deal. All right, so every 50 years was the Jubilee. Okay, so let's continue. So we know the situation for women at this time, that with rare exception, right, they could not own property, they couldn't earn a living, all right? So they were dependent on their male relatives. And so you can understand, when we read, especially in the New Testament, when we talk about, when the Pharisees and the Sadducees would talk about women who were sinners, in many cases, these were women who had stepped into prostitution. Because if you're a woman and you don't have a male relative to support you, you can't own property, and you can't have a job, a legitimate job, so what do you fall into? Prostitution. Now, of course, there were situations where it wasn't necessary. Well, it's never necessary, but you see my point, is that that explains, certainly in a number of cases, why there was prostitution. Comments or questions? Okay, let's jump right in then. Question number 1. what are the most significant challenges faced by women today, especially widows, the elderly, or single mothers? Financial challenges, absolutely. Financial challenges. What else? Loneliness is a big deal, especially when maybe your husband has passed away and you don't have children, right? That's a difficult place to be. Or you have children, but they live quite a distance away. That's a challenge. What else? Health, yeah. The normal things that come along. What about single mothers? What is especially challenging in those cases? Working and children together, yeah. Absolutely. I think one of the other challenges, and this is true for single parents across the board, but you know, raising children is difficult, and when you have to make decisions on behalf of your children, and you're the only one that you can turn to make those decisions, that there's a comfort in knowing when mom and dad are both in the picture that you can share those decisions. You can talk about those decisions and support each other in making those decisions. When you have a single parent, mother or father, you don't have anybody to turn to the same way you would if the spouse was there, right? So there's an added stress that you're dealing with this all by yourself. So if it's the death of a spouse, you're dealing with the grief while you're raising children, working and raising children. If it's a divorce situation, you're dealing with the grief and the struggle that goes along with that. So it definitely is. It definitely is challenging. Yeah, other comments about that? Yeah. What are things that we have in our society today that ease some of that difficulty? What are things that we have in our society today that ease some of that difficulty? Yeah, welfare programs, absolutely. Job training, you know, certainly things in that vein. One of the challenges that I think makes it difficult for single parents, you know, for whatever reason, is we are a much more segmented society than others, in the sense that what generally happens not generally, but what often happens when children grow up, they leave. Or when, so you can have lots of relatives, but in our country, they can be spread all over the place. And we can do that because it's relatively easy to move from place to place now with airplanes, cars, trains, so on and so forth. So you can maintain relationships even though you live in various parts of the country, but you're still not getting the support of having all of your relatives in the same place. Does that make sense? If mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, the children, their children, aunts and uncles all live in the same town, that's a lot of support. You can really take care of each other. But that's in many cases, that's not the society that we live in. We're a very pragmatic and very segmented society. So we lose some of that support. Other comments or questions?
I think one of the other things, too, when you think about women that are widows, organizations where they can go and have a sense of belonging.
Yep.
So like our Council on Aging would be a good organization.
Yeah.
Someone to connect with. I mean, besides being involved in things at your church or the library or whatever, those kinds of things are important for people to feel a sense of belonging.
Yes, when an example that comes up, I was raised by a single mother, and so, there were 3 boys, and there was a program, I think it was sponsored by the YWCA, or I'm not sure, it was called PWP, Parents Without Partners. It was based in Fort Wayne, and basically it was a an opportunity for single parents to support one another, have different activities going on and so forth. There were discounts on different activities for families to do. We always used to go to the movies because if you were part of PWP, Parents Without Partners, you got discount movie tickets. Problem is that you could only go to G-rated movies. Man, that's no good. You can't see Star Wars because it's, PG. But that's all right, right? So anyway, those kinds of situations, things that we have today that maybe weren't a part of the situation then. So comments or questions? All right. So all of that will apply when we start reading. All of that will apply and be meaningful when we start reading here. Okay, so famine in Israel. Would someone read Ruth chapter 1, verse 1, please? Okay, so we learn a lot right away during the time of the Judges, and we looked at that. This is during the time of the Judges. There was a famine, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab. So, of course, when we hear the word Bethlehem, that connects with us right away, and it should. That's important, right? We think the birth of Jesus, obviously, is where we go with that. So there's this man, he comes from Bethlehem, and he sojourns to the country of Moab. Now, why do you think, based on verse 1, why do you think that he and his family are moving to Moab? Yeah, there's a famine on. So perhaps there's food in Moab, jobs in Moab, so on and so forth. So probably a very practical point of going here. So they sojourn, and it was he and his wife and their 2 sons. He and his wife and their 2 sons. All right, would somebody read the opening verse of our story from on the page there? Someone who hasn't read today, let your voice be heard. Yes, where it says, read Ruth 1:1.
The opening verse of our story sets the stage for the events that follow. During the time of Judges, a famine struck Israel. Ironically, the city of Bethlehem, whose name literally means house of bread, could no longer feed its own people.
Okay, so those things are interesting. One of the things when you're at the seminary, when you're studying Hebrew, is you learn the meaning of the word Bethlehem, and it means house of bread. That certainly has some important meaning when we think of Jesus Christ, and we think of Holy Communion, and using unleavened bread in Holy Communion as it becomes his flesh, and so on and so forth. So, and he is born there, so there definitely are some important connections there. So that's interesting. But like it's pointing out, ironically, Bethlehem could not feed its people, right? Even though the name means house of bread. All right, let's continue. All right, so number 3 is pretty obvious. In response to the lack of food, where did the man of Bethlehem in Judah take his wife and his 2 sons? To Moab. All right. Would someone read for us, please, number 4?
Israelites descended from Abraham. From whom did the inhabitants of Moab descend? How was this individual related to Abraham?
Okay. So let's take a look. This is important because we want to know, who are the Moabites, right? Who are they, these people that live there? So keep your finger there in Ruth, and let's turn to Genesis 19:30 to 38. Genesis 19:30 to 38. Right? I'll read that. Now Lot went up from Zoar and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come in to us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. The next day, the firstborn said to the younger, Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that you may preserve offspring from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also. The younger rose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. All right, so not a terribly auspicious beginning, for the Moabites. To be lying in bed and not know that somebody has laid down with you and gotten up, you have to be pretty drunk. That's a lot of wine to be so soused as to not be aware that someone has lain down with you and gotten up, and you wake up the next morning not knowing what has happened. Yeah. All right. So, but anyway, that's the story. Where do we get the Moabites and the Ammonites? Is where that's coming from. Okay. Comments or questions? All right. And finishing number 4, who is Lot to Abraham? Nephew. Yep. So making that connection. And of course, where do the Moabites settle down? In Moab, right? Or that's, the land there is named Moab. All right. Would someone read for us the next paragraph, please? The Moabites' inhabited land. Okay, so a little geography to kind of bring all of this about. A lot of this, of course, is kind of supposition because we stick to, of course, what we have in Scripture. But the geography makes sense, right? If it's Moab, remember that Moab is, what did it say? 3,000 feet above sea level, and it's 50 miles north to south, 30 miles across, and the rain is coming there. So obviously things are growing. And of course we can't see Egypt, but when we think about Egypt, why is it that people would sojourn to Egypt? Because the Nile River is there and stuff grows where there's water, right? Which is a lot of times why you find cities built near sources of water, right? Aside from the fact that you need water to make crops grow, What else is good about living near water? What? Transportation, fishing, drinking is nice, that's good. So it makes sense that you would find cities near sources of water. All right? Okay, Elimelech's family. All right? So let's return to Ruth, and we'll take a look at verse 2. Would someone read Ruth 1:2, please?
The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi, and his two sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went to the country of Moab and stayed there.
Okay, so we have Elimelech. He is the patriarch, right? Elimelech is the patriarch, and his wife's name is Naomi, right? And that's, you meet people named Naomi. That's a nice name. If you're not aware, Naomi means pleasant. Pleasant. It's a good name to use. And so you have Elimelech and Naomi. They have two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, not sure which, either one is fine. They were Ephrathites. Remember when we talk during Advent, we talk about Bethlehem Ephrathah, right? Bethlehem Ephrathah, when we're having those Advent readings leading up to Christmas. The Ephrathites were a group of people from Bethlehem in Judah. They went to the country of Moab and remained there. So it's a transplant. So Elimelech, Naomi, and their two sons travel down to Moab. All right? Okay. Let's see. Would someone read the paragraph there then under Elimelech's family?
We do not know for certain the route Elimelech and his family traveled to their destination in Moab. If they journeyed north from Bethlehem and crossed the Jordan River above the Dead Sea, the distance they traveled may have been about 50 miles.
Okay. So, obviously, they're going to come down from Judah, and there's this huge sea right there, right? So they got to deal with that. So they could go north and go over and go across the Jordan River, which would be a whole lot easier. I doubt they went south, but it just tells us that they went to Moab, right? It just tells us that they went to Moab. Okay. Let's see. Number 5, identify the other members of Elimelech's family who traveled with him to Moab. And of course, we recognize the sons. All right. Number 6, what other key biblical figures also claimed Bethlehem as their birthplace? Let's look these up. Would someone look up 1 Samuel 17, verse 12? 1 Samuel 17, verse 12. Who would be willing to look that up for us? Thank you, David. And how about Matthew 2, verse 1? Matthew 2, verse 1. Thank you, Corey. Okay. David, go ahead whenever you have that first reading. Thank you. So David obviously rings a bell for us. Jesse rings a bell for us, right? The root of Jesse, right? All of that should be ringing bells about Advent and so forth, those readings that we get there. And how about Matthew 2, verse 1? Thank you. So, all of this, whenever we study the Bible, we're always sniffing like a dog. And what we're sniffing for as we read the Bible is, where's Jesus? We're looking for Jesus, right? Because without Jesus, the Bible really is just another book. But when we read the Bible, one of the things, our standards is, look for Jesus. Where's Jesus coming through in this? And we go up to Matthew, and we learn that Jesus, of course, is born in Bethlehem, right? Ephrathah, we've talked about, the people, the Ephrathites, David is an Ephrathite, right? And so Jesus is descended from David, and we learn about Jesse. And eventually, of course, if you studied Ruth before, you know that it will eventually connect here as well. So that's what we're looking for. That is the jewel that's buried under the earth. It's the pearl in the clam that we're looking for. Okay? Let's continue. Would someone read the paragraph on our page in Ruth 1:2? Okay, so like today, a lot of times you will find cities named after people or after group of people, right? For example, Kendallville is named after, I forget his first name, but a man by the last name of Kendall, unless I do have that right, don't I? Unless I've mistaken. Fort Wayne is named after Anthony Wayne, obviously a general in the Revolutionary War, and other situations like that. So you see that Bethlehem was originally named Ephrathah, right, coming out of this situation there. Okay? All right. Continuing, Naomi, a woman of sorrows. Would someone read Ruth 1:3-5? Okay, so a whole lot of tragedy in 3 verses. A whole lot of death goes on, right? It's not a good situation. We don't know, at least at this point, why Elimelech passed away, but he's dead, right? Could have been lots of things. And so for a time, Naomi is left with her 2 sons. And at this point, she's in pretty good shape still, because she has her 2 sons who can take care of her, right? Until, right? Well, not until, but they take Moabite wives. And the name of the one name was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth, right? So to help us connect what's going on here, you have Elimelech and Naomi. They have 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. They both, the 2 sons, marry Moabites, right? And Moabites are descended from who? Lot, Abraham's nephew, right? So Mahlon and Chilion take Moabite women as their wives, Orpah and Ruth. So Ruth is descended from Abraham, but through Lot, Abraham's nephew, all right? Because she's there. And that makes sense. Right? When you live somewhere and it's time, to get married, obviously, it's typical to look for a spouse where you live, right? But of course, in our day and age, you can look for a spouse all over the world via the internet. So that's what's going on. Would someone read the rest of the paragraph under Naomi, a woman of sorrows?
The word sojourn in verse 1 indicates Elimelech's intent to live in Moab only temporarily. Once the famine subsided, he intended to return to Israel. God, however, had other plans.
Okay, so, that's an interesting perspective to think of it that way, that Elimelech's plan was only to go to Moab temporarily and then to return home, right? A lot of us are descendants from immigrants, right? So it's, you might come from a family where the intention was simply to come here temporarily and go home. But I'm guessing that most folks that immigrated to the United States, made this their home and so forth. But that's interesting. Any comments or questions on that situation? Okay, so God already is directing things and taking things in a certain direction. So let's take a look at number 7. Would someone read number 7 for us?
What happened to Elimelech while he and his family lived in Moab? According to what you read earlier in our study, who became responsible for Naomi because of this incident?
Okay, so we found that out. Obviously, the two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, became responsible for their mother at that point. In terms of safety, in terms of financial provision, so on and so forth. So that's a little different today, right? That's a little different today. With Mahlon and Chilion and their mother Naomi, it was all on them, right? Now, there are some things we don't know. For example, did Elimelech have savings that his two sons inherited? In other words, what did the two sons use to care for Naomi? Maybe they had an inheritance from Elimelech. We don't know. But if they didn't, that was all on them financially, right? What do we have, in this day and age to take care of the elderly? What normally, sometimes do we prepare for the elderly? Everybody's favorite, Social Security is there, all right? If I'm married and my spouse dies, obviously, unless there's a major problem, any savings that we have, I inherit, so on and so forth, pensions, whatever it happens to be. But these things are not present with Naomi and the two sons, all right? So it's a different kind of situation, all right? Okay. Let's see. Would someone read number 8, please?
Naomi's two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, married, identified their wives by name, and what the author of Ruth says about their nationality.
All right, so we covered that. The stress we want to make is that Ruth is a Moabite, right? And we know where she descends from and so on and so forth. All right, next, while God forbade the intermarriage of his people with the Canaanites living in the promised land, Deuteronomy 7:1-3, no such prohibition existed against the Moabites, although fierce and bloody hostilities often erupted between these two cultures. The Moabites and Israelites remained cousins through Lot, all right? So maybe in your family, you can name a city or a town where you have a lot of cousins or relatives, right? Where a lot of your family lives. Maybe Kendallville is not the place of your birth and upraising, and so you have transplanted here, but you have family somewhere else, right? You have a lot of family. Oh, all those Johnsons, the whole Johnson clan lives over there in such and such city and so on and so forth. So that's what's going on there. But notice that God does not forbid marriage between the Moabites and the Ephrathites, or the people from Bethlehem. Why did God say, do not marry Canaanites? Sorry? Their religions, right? And the danger, of course, being is that if you marry someone of a false religion, that there's the danger of being pulled toward that religion, right? And so God is protecting by saying that. He's protecting by saying that and saying, have nothing to do with these people, right? because of the spiritual dangers that exist there. Not so with the Moabites. Yeah, yeah. And my guess is they descended and brought that, with them through Lot and Abraham and so on and so forth. Right? So, number 9, originally Elimelech intended simply to sojourn to Moab. How long did the famine in Israel last? 10 years. That's a long time. It's a long time. Okay, so number 10. After the death of Elimelech, Naomi depended on her sons for subsistence. What tragedy happened to Naomi next in verse 5? Her sons died, right? Who knows what? Maybe Elimelech had some sort of inherited problem with his health that he transferred, or that descended from him to his 2 sons. Who knows what? Tragically, right? Imagine that you're Naomi. This is a tough spot to be in, that your husband dies and then both of your sons die. That is, a terribly, terribly difficult place to be. And then who is left, of course, right? Both Mahlon and Chilion die, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So difficult place to be, all right? And as we will explore next time, she is not only without these 3 men, but now she has Orpah and Ruth. Orpah and Ruth. So they all have each other, but remember what it is like for women in this culture, right? What their options are in this culture. All right, let's continue. God's word for today. When viewed in hindsight and with the eyes of faith, even tragic incidents in our lives achieve a God-ordained purpose. Number 11, consider a time in your life when you felt as if God had abandoned you. What role did family members, friends, or acquaintances play in helping to restore your faith in Him? Anybody want to comment on that generally? Or if you have a personal experience that you'd like to share, that would be fine too. What can family members do for us when we're dealing with a difficult situation?
Might help financially.
Yeah.
Just to come and be with you, bring food.
Yes.
Usually food is the first level of comfort that we think about, because once you get your belly full, then things start to look a little different.
They look up, yeah. They can, if it's the death of a spouse, they can help with the kids. People who are older are often very helpful because they've gone through difficulties in their lives and they have a lot of wisdom, namely, they know that if you've been alive for a significant amount of time, you know that trouble comes along, but it also goes away, and that's a helpful thing to know. So obviously, there's a lot of support that family and friends bring. The difficulty, of course, when we read that, when it says, even tragic incidents in our lives achieve a God-ordained purpose, it is difficult to see that purpose while you're going through it, right? I mean, one thing you can say to somebody who's going through a hard time is, God is making something good happen out of this, right? When we think of Romans God works out the good for those who love Him, even in difficult situations. When you're going through it, sometimes that's not a lot of comfort because you're experiencing the difficulty. You're going through it. And so for somebody to say something good's going to come out of this, a lot of times falls on deaf ears because of the pain you're going through, the anguish. But a year later, you look back and you go, yeah, I can see what God was doing. This was very hard, but I can see what God was doing. All of us have been there, I'm sure. And this is something that we might share with Naomi at this point, is that, wow, you're in a bad situation, but the Lord loves you, and he is working out something good. And, of course, that's what we'll explore as we go on in the book of Ruth. All right? Okay, let's take a look real quick. Read James 1, 2-4. While a life free of pain and suffering is appealing, such a life is impossible this side of heaven. How does God ask us to consider life's difficulties and trials? What purpose do they serve? So for our last action for today, let's go to the book of James in the New Testament. The book of James in the New Testament. All right, so James is pretty close to the end. James is after Hebrews. If you have it on your phone, you can look that up real quick. James chapter 1, verses 2-4. If someone has that, go ahead and read that for us.
Consider it nothing but joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you fall into various trials. Be assured that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result and do a thorough work, so that you may be perfect and completely developed, lacking in nothing.
Okay, now imagine you're Naomi, and you've lost your husband and your sons, and somebody comes up to you and says, consider it all joy, Naomi, right? Imagine how you would receive that. Consider it all joy, what you're going through. Notice that it doesn't say happiness. It says joy. That's significant, right? The Lord calls us to have joy even in the midst of trials. It doesn't say happiness or comfort. It says joy. But what is the goal? The testing of your faith produces what I have in the ESV is steadfastness. Endurance is also fine, right? And let the steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. God's goal is that this trial would produce steadfastness in your faith. In other words, a strengthening in your faith. And so at the end of that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. So God is using these things not to punish, not to cause pain and misery, but instead as a means of strengthening faith. And the stronger our faith is produced or is made, the more peace and joy we have. That really is in a sinful world, the best way to peace and joy is by going through trials, right? Maybe not the best, but certainly one of the ways to peace and joy is by going through trials and learning as you go through those, right? Comments or questions?
Early on today, I read Jews were told to marry inside their own tribes.
Right, yeah.
And I don't remember, there's 2 or 3 diseases that are just Jewish. Is that because of their intense inbreeding?
Good question. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Certainly God did not advise what Lot's daughters did, right? But he did, talking about marrying within your own clan and so forth, But interesting stuff. Well, let's close with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, you're so good and gracious to us. We thank you that you have given us the book of Ruth to study. We thank you that you've given us time to study it. We ask, dear Lord, that you would encourage us as we study this book to derive from it your lessons and your encouragement, and to find ultimately the place for Jesus in our study. We thank you for the good news of Jesus, that by his death and his resurrection we are made holy. And we thank you also, dear Lord, that as we study, we recognize that even the trials in our life have purpose and meaning. In Jesus'